So, hello there, and welcome back to another Night of the Movies podcast. I'm Spy Knight, and in these podcasts, I love talking all things movies and TV, and whatever I want, whenever I want. And in today's podcast, I'm reviewing 28 Years Later. So, let's get into it, shall we? 28 Years Later, in case you don't know already, is the third film in the 28 Days Later franchise. The 28 Days Later franchise, which began all the way back in 2002, that's right, 23 years ago now, with 28 Days Later, which was directed by Danny Boyle and written by Alex Garland, and the film starred Cillian Murphy, Naomi Harris, Brendan Gleeson, and Christopher Eccleston. And I watched that film for the first time a good couple of weeks ago, and it might be my recency bias or whatever, but I absolutely loved that film. I love 28 Days Later, and I think it might be my new favourite Danny Boyle movie. Before that, I don't know what it would be, actually. There's a lot of Danny Boyle movies that I really love, and I have been taken by, but 28 Days Later was the film which, to me, felt like his best directed. And that might be a slightly controversial opinion, but I just love the way he directs the movie. I love Trainspotting, and I love Slumdog Millionaire as well, but 28 Days Later I thought was pretty special. Then the franchise was followed up, I think, a couple of years later, a good few years later actually, if I'm not mistaken, in 2007 with 28 Weeks Later, which Danny Boyle didn't direct and Alex Garland didn't come back to write the script for. Instead, the film was directed by someone else, I don't know who off the top of my head right now, and the film also followed a completely different cast. It starred the likes of Robert Carlyle, Jeremy Renner, Rose Byrne, and Idris Elba. And the second film I didn't love. I still think it's a good film, I don't think it's a bad film, but it's very much the same as the first film, at least it felt like very much the same sort of movie as the first film, but bigger, with a bigger budget and more gore and more violence. Still, I liked the film nonetheless. However, with this new 28 Days Later film, titled 28 Years Later, Danny Boyle is back directing the film. He's back in the directing chair, and Alex Garland is back writing the script. And if you don't know who Danny Boyle is by name, if you've never heard of him as a director before, I slightly alluded to it before, but he has directed such movies as Trainspotting, which is one of those films people still talk about today. The sequel, T2 Trainspotting, which I haven't heard enough people talk about, though my brother raves about that movie and he wants me to watch it desperately. I have seen the first Trainspotting, I just haven't watched the sequel. I thought the first Trainspotting was great. I need to watch it again though, because it was, it'd been built up so much for me that I kind of found it a little disappointing, but I still really liked it. But I'm going to watch it again shortly. But yeah, he directed the two Trainspotting movies. He directed Shallow Grave, which is a great film. He directed Slumdog Millionaire, which I love. I love that film. He directed Millions, which I like. He directed the Disney Plus TV series Pistol, all about the Sex Pistols. He directed 127 Hours, which starred James Franco, and it was about the person who gets stuck in the middle of nowhere in this cavern, if I remember correctly, and I love that film too. He has directed so many movies that I'm just forgetting off the top of my head right now. He directed Yesterday, the film all about the one guy who remembered the Beatles, and that's a big Beatles fan. I really enjoyed that film. I understand why it wasn't for a lot of people, but yeah, I like that movie. Danny Boyle has been working in film for quite a bit of time now. He directed The Beach, which Alex Garland also co-wrote the script for. And I don't care what anybody says, I really like The Beach. I mean, I haven't seen it in a good couple of years, but, I remember really enjoying that film. The point I'm making is, I'm a fan of Danny Boyle. And the only film that I know of his that I hadn't seen before a couple of weeks ago was 28 Days Later. And I remember watching that film for the first time and being blown away by it. And then my excitement for 28 Years Later instantly increased very much, especially as I also enjoyed 28 Weeks Later. But knowing that Danny Boyle was coming back to direct the third installment in this franchise had me very, very excited. And it also got me very excited that Alex Garland was returning to write the script, because since writing the script for the first 28 Days Later, he has gone on to do many movies. He's gone on to direct many films, such as Ex Machina, which I think is a very interesting film. He directed Annihilation, which I watched for the first time about a year ago now. wasn't for me. I understand that a lot of people like the movie. It just wasn't for me, you know. Not every film's going to be for me, and that film wasn't for me. But I think last year he directed Civil War, which I liked quite a lot. He wrote that film, if I'm not mistaken, as well. Alex Garland has become quite a prolific filmmaker in himself as well. So them two reuniting 23 years later after the first film that they worked on together, at least I think it's the first film that they worked on together, had me very, very excited. And I loved the trailers for this movie. Because, you know, I really felt this when I went to go watch this film at the cinema the other day, and I saw these horror trailers before the film started. I was like, oh, these horror trailers, I mean, they're not bad, but they're all kind of the same. You know, the way the horror trailer is sort of structured, they're all kind of the same. But then you look at the trailer for 28 years later, and it's such a different kind of horror trailer, such a different kind of trailer for a horror movie. So yeah, I thought the trailers looked absolutely brilliant. It looked creepy, it looked scary, and it looked like, you know, that world from 28 Days Later, but 28 years later, which I was all in for. And with Danny Boyle and Alex Garland returning to, you know, to work on this film together, that had me so excited. I've already said a couple of times, but, you know, that was one of the big draws for me. And also, I like the cast of this movie: Aaron Taylor Johnson, Jodie Comer, Ray Fiennes, great cast. I was so excited about watching this film. I didn't actually get to see it the day it came out. I had to wait a couple of days, and it was on my mind about what the film was going to be like in those couple of days that I was waiting to see the movie, because I heard some reviewers that I follow online who were, some movie reviews that I follow online absolutely loved this film, were raving about it, and then there was some movie reviews which I follow online who were a bit mixed on the film, and then there was some movie reviews I follow online who hated the film, and I was like, okay, what am I going to feel? Hopefully I'm not going to hate it, and hopefully I'm going to be one of those reviewers. I'm going to be on the island with all these reviewers that end up loving the film. So with that, I went with my anticipation and my worries, you know, because of some of the reviews I heard regarding this film. I went to go and watch the film at the cinema a couple of days ago and now. And after seeing the film, I am very happy to say that I loved this movie. It was not the film I expected it to be. I mean, it was at the same time, but it wasn't the film I expected it to be also. And it ended up being this beautiful film about death that happened to take place during a zombie apocalypse. I was watching this film and I was swept up by the story, by the characters, by the world building, and by Danny Boyle's directing. I love the way Danny Boyle directs these movies. These are, well, he's only directed 2 of the 28 Days Later films, but I love the way he directs his movies, because it really feels like he knows this world. He knows how to direct this film, and it feels like he's experimenting with how to shoot these zombie sequences, and how to shoot so many sequences in this film alone, not just the zombie sequences, but so many sequences in this film alone, in his own style and in his own way, that is so, as somebody who loves, you know, experimental kind of filmmaking, really attach myself to the way he shot so many sequences in this film. Plus, the story had me engaged. I thought it was a beautifully written film. You know, Alex Garland really did a great job at not just doing what the first film did all over again, kind of like 28 Weeks Later. And I like 28 Weeks Later. I'm not dissing that movie, I don't want to sound like I am. Again, I do like that film, but again, to me it kind of felt like, you know, the same sort of thing as 28 Days Later, but just bigger. Whilst this film feels like a completely different film to 28 Days Later, in my opinion, and in all the right ways. I went into the film thinking I was going to see some sort of movie to 28 Days Later, but more advanced, more technically advanced, more, you know, bigger, because it got a bigger budget now that they had from the first film. And I thought I was going to say a different kind of film, in all honesty. And the film ended up being, I was, like I said, swept up by. I was hooked to the film from start to finish. None of it didn't really work for me. I mean, even the ending, which I know as people talking, a lot of people really hate the ending to the film. The more I think about it, the more I like it, because of how it sets up the sequel. And on the topic of the sequel, what's going to be called 28 Days Later, The Bone Temple, I think it's got something like that. That's coming out in January of next year, which is slightly worrying because when a film comes out in January, it usually means they shouldn't have any confidence in it. But that has been proven, wrong over the past couple of years occasionally. Like I think Companion came out in January of this year. But anyway, and Companion was a great film. But, that's besides the point. I am slightly worried about 28 years later, I must say 28 days later, 28 years later, The Bone Temple, the sequel to this film. Not because it's coming out in January, that's not my biggest worry, but because it's not being directed by Danny Boyle. It's being directed by Neil DaCosta, who's probably best known for directing the Candyman remake, which came out a couple of years ago now. And I wasn't really a big fan of the Candyman remake. It wasn't for me. So I'm hoping I'm proven wrong by her direction when it comes to 28 years later sequel, 28 years later The Bone Temple. But I'm worried that it's not being directed by Danny Boyle, because Danny Boyle, you can just tell when it comes to this movie, understands this world, understands how to direct a movie like this. He just gets it, whilst I don't know if another director would. I mean, the guy directed, I don't know who it was now, I should probably look it up. Who directed 28 Weeks Later? Just give me a second as I look it up. Yeah, it came out 2007, I was correct there. 28 Weeks Later was directed by Juan Carlos Fresnadino. I might be pronouncing, I'm definitely pronouncing their name wrong. They did a fine job directing the second film, but you could tell it wasn't directed by Danny Boyle, and I hope we don't get that from the next movie in this franchise. And on the topic of future movies in this franchise, I do hope we get to see the third installment in the 28 Years Later trilogy, because this is meant to be a new trilogy of films. It's meant to be the beginning of a trilogy of movies. We're meant to have this film, 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple, which has already been shot, but the third film in this trilogy hasn't been shot yet and is going to be financed if this film does well at the box office. And I for one hope it does well at the box office, because I want to see the story continue. Because, as much as I love this film, it does very much feel like part one of a grander story. I mean, it is a complete film. I've heard some people say it feels incomplete. No, in my opinion, this is a complete film. There are character arcs which have a beginning, middle, and end. This feels like a complete movie in the same way that so many superhero movies, which people rave about, over the past couple of years, I've felt like complete movies. It felt like part one of a grander story, and that's what this film feels like. But it still felt like a complete story, and I liked that it felt like a complete story and also set up the movies to come. And like I said, I want to see how this story continues. I wanted the second and third films in this franchise, or well, really the fourth and fifth films in these franchises, because I'm sure they'll link up to 28 Days Later and 28 Weeks Later as the franchise goes on. The point I'm making is I wanted a continuation of this franchise because of how this film set up the future events in a very interesting way. If you think about the ending of this film a lot more, there's something there which could be could make the franchise take a very dark turn going forward. But at the same time, I loved, as I've already said, how this film was his own story. Like I said, the characters have a beginning, middle, and end, and all the characters are interesting in my opinion. I particularly like the main character, Spike, which is a bit weird to say that, the main character in the film, which I didn't know this going into the film, has the same name as me. And I was watching this one with my mates in the cinema, and as soon as the character Spike first appears on screen and he's called Spike, my mate looked at me and like, what are the chances? But anyway, because it doesn't usually happen with characters in films. I can't think of many other characters in movies or in TV shows for that matter that are called Spike. There's probably one that I'm forgetting off the top of my head. I feel like there's a big one that I'm forgetting, but I didn't expect that. And I thought the character Spike though was great. I love that he was a kid. I've heard some people criticising that, we follow that main character was a kid in this movie, was a 12-year-old kid. I'm like, to me that makes the film all the more engaging, because we're following this kid who has not grown up a normal life. He's grown up in a zombie apocalypse. He's grown up in this isolated village with these people who act like they're in a cult, which is really fascinating when you watch the film, and to see how that character handles his day-to-day life, and when you realise that he's 12 years old and he's going out at the start of the film to hunt, and try and kill zombies, is like, it really gets you thinking, like, oh my god, how dark is this world? This must be terrifying to be a kid in this world. And I loved how that was explored through our main character, through our central character. And I thought Jodie Comer's character was really well done also. And Aaron Taylor-Johnson, who I'm not a really big fan of, in all honesty. I liked him as Kick-Ass. I haven't really liked him in anything else since then. And I was worried going into this movie that he was going to feel like the odd one out. He was going to give a really bad performance. And I don't think he gave a great performance, but I did like him a lot more than I thought I was going to. And yeah, I thought he played the character well and fit in with the narrative perfectly. And Ray Fiennes, oh my god, Ray Fiennes is perfect in this film. Perfect. And apparently, I think this is his first role since Conclave, and it's a very different role at that. Yeah, I loved Ray Fiennes in this film. I loved all the performances, all the characters, the story I thought was beautifully done and made sense with the events of the first two movies. It made sense as well that this would be where the world of the 28 Days Later films is at this point in the franchise, 28 years later after the event of the first movie. And I loved this film. It isn't without its flaws. There were a couple of scenes where I was like, okay, that character's doing a questionable thing, and I'm not sure if that actually happened in this case. I'm not going to go into spoilers there, but there's a couple of scenes where I was like, okay, you could have done that better. And I did miss that music from the first two movies in this film. Like that main theme, where it's just the guitar building up. If you watch the first two 28 Days Later films, you'll understand what I mean. There's a main theme that keeps coming back in those two movies whenever the zombies are coming, and you don't get that in this film, and I did miss that. That being said, the musical score by Young Fathers is a great musical score, and I did like it. I just wanted to hear that main theme back. And the film, does also, it leaves some things to be desired, but there are more films coming in this franchise. At least there's definitely at least one more film coming in this franchise, and hopefully those things which have been left to be desired get paid off in the next two movies. Hopefully those things which are set up, like hopefully we get to see more of the village that we see at the start of the movie, that we see throughout the film even. Hopefully we get to see more of an exploration into that, because I think the village, the sort of cult-like village that we see in this movie, is fascinating. And I think it's explored enough in this film for you to be interested to see how it's explored in the movies going forward. And yeah, I loved it, as I've already said, and I'm so happy that I did, because I know it's not working for everybody, and if this one wasn't for you, it wasn't for you. That's totally fine, all from a subjective, and there's some movies out there which people absolutely love and I hate, and vice versa. So I get why it's not for everybody, and I get why some people maybe were disappointed by this movie because they were expecting a different kind of film. But as I've already said, I just got swept up by it. I was engaged in the film throughout. I loved the way it looked. I loved the visceral nature of the film, and I couldn't believe how much it worked for me. It's not my favourite from this franchise, and it's still I still definitely prefer the first 28 Days Later, because I was blown away by that movie when I saw it for the first time a good couple of weeks ago now. But this, I think, is a worthy third installment in this franchise, and that is why I'm going to say that 28 years later, I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. Again, it isn't without its flaws, and I don't think it's perfect, and it does feel like part one of a grand story. But it kind of feels like part one, in the same sense that The Fellowship of the Ring, the first Lord of the Rings film, feels like part one of a grander story. And yet, in my opinion, Fellowship of the Ring still feels like a complete story. There's a beginning, middle, and end. And that's what you get in this film. There's a character arc with our main character, Spike, which is engaging in all the ways we want it to be. Yeah. This film had me emotionally as well. One thing I really touched on in this review, in my review, which I've been rambling on with, is how much I was emotionally taken back by this film. Like, I was sat there about 3/4 of the way into the film, and I was almost crying, which I didn't expect to get from this film. And I really liked how it worked emotionally, and also there's this kind of philosophical touch with the film as well. There's a philosophical nature with this film, which made it all the more engaging to watch again, and not in the way I expected it to be. It was not the film I expected it to be, and it kind of was at the same time, but also it ended up being this beautiful film about death that got me thinking and got me wanting to watch it all over again. If I get a chance, I'm going to go back and rewatch this film over the next 2 weeks. Well, in the near distant future, and hopefully it works me even more, because I was swept up by this movie, both emotionally and by the way it was directed, and by everything else going on in the film. I was swept up by this film in all the ways you wanted to be. Emotionally, by the way it was directed, by the story, by the characters, and all that jazz. It just worked to me, and it helped. One last thing, it helped that the village that you see in the film, the main town that you see our main characters come from the film, is somewhere that I've been on holiday twice. So I was watching that village at the start of the film, and I was like, oh, I've been on holiday here. I've walked around all this village. I know this place quite well. Well, not quite well, but I know this place well, and it was kind of funny watching the beginning of the movie and thinking, I've been on holiday here. I walked where our main character walking right now, and that just added to my enjoyment a little more. Yes, I love this movie. It was not what I expected, and all the better so, in my opinion. And so, all in all, as what he said, and as I'm going to say once more in this podcast today, 28 years later is an 8.5 out of 10 from me. Anyway guys, that's it for today's podcast. If you have seen 28 Years Later, please let me know your thoughts on it in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching or listening to this podcast. And if you haven't yet, please do click down below and like and subscribe on this podcast. And look forward to many more podcasts and many more videos coming very, very soon on this channel. As what he said, thank you so much for watching or listening to this podcast. And I will see you guys again soon. But bye for now. Bye.